What would you do if your boss handed you an impossible task, laughed in your face, and offered you his entire monthly salary to complete it? Most people would walk away. But Marcus Thompson wasn't most people. And when tech billionaire David Harrison made that exact challenge in front of his entire board of directors, he had no idea he was about to be schooled by the man he barely noticed every single day. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. This is the story of how a security guard's hidden past brought a Fortune 500 CEO to his knees, exposed a multi-million-dollar conspiracy, and changed everything we think we know about judging people by their uniforms. The 42nd floor of the Harrison Tech Tower pierced the Seattle skyline like a steel and glass monument to digital dominance. From his corner office, David Harrison could see the Space Needle to the north and Mount Rainier's snow-capped peak to the south. But his attention was focused on neither. Instead, his eyes were fixed on the holographic display floating above his mahogany desk, showing real-time stock prices, global market fluctuations, and the kind of data that turned milliseconds into millions. At 38, David Harrison had already achieved what most entrepreneurs could only dream of. Harrison Tech had started in his Stanford dorm room 15 years ago with nothing but a revolutionary idea about quantum encryption and a maxed-out credit card. Now, the company employed over 50,000 people across 4 continents, held patents worth billions, and dominated the cybersecurity market with an iron fist. The office itself was a testament to his success. Italian marble floors reflected the light from floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a commanding view of Elliott Bay. Abstract sculptures worth more than most people's houses occupied strategic corners, while a collection of first-edition technology books lined custom-built shelves. The conference table could seat 20 executives and was equipped with holographic projectors that could display three-dimensional models of network architectures and data flows. But today, none of that mattered. Today, David Harrison was facing the biggest crisis in his company's history. The secure server room 3 floors below had been breached exactly 72 hours ago. Not by hackers wielding keyboards from some distant country, but by someone with physical access to the building, someone who knew exactly what they were looking for. The intruder had bypassed 7 levels of security, disabled cameras with surgical precision, and accessed the most classified project in Harrison Tech's portfolio, Project Siegfried. Project Siegfried wasn't just another software development initiative. It was a quantum encryption protocol that could theoretically make any digital communication completely unhackable. The Department of Defense had already committed $200 million to its development, and 3 other government agencies had signed preliminary agreements worth another $500 million. More importantly, whoever controlled Siegfried would effectively control the future of digital security for the next 2 decades. The intruder had left behind only one clue: a single sheet of paper placed deliberately on David's personal workstation in the secure lab. The paper contained 47 lines of text written in what appeared to be German, but arranged in a pattern that suggested sophisticated encoding. It wasn't random. Every character, every space, every punctuation mark had been placed with mathematical precision. David had immediately called in his best people. The head of cybersecurity, Dr. Martinez, had run the message through every decryption algorithm in their database. Nothing. The chief technology officer, James Wright, had assembled a team of 12 cryptographers and given them unlimited resources to crack the code. After 3 days of round-the-clock work, they had made 0 progress. The FBI Cybercrime Division had been consulted discreetly. Their experts had fed the message through supercomputers at Quantico and come up empty-handed. A private consulting firm that specialized in Cold War-era encryption had been paid $200,000 for 48 hours of analysis. Their conclusion? The encoding method was unlike anything in their extensive databases. Meanwhile, Harrison Tech's stock price had dropped 8% as rumors of a security breach began circulating on trading floors. The board of directors was growing increasingly restless, and David could feel their confidence in his leadership beginning to waver. Competitors were already circling like sharks, sensing weakness in the water. The quarterly board meeting had been moved up by 2 weeks. In exactly 6 hours, David would have to face 23 of the most powerful investors and business leaders in the technology sector. They would demand answers he didn't have and solutions he couldn't provide. The company's future, his personal fortune, and the livelihoods of 50,000 employees hung on the balance. David loosened his Hermes tie and poured himself 3 fingers of 25-year-old Macallan from the crystal decanter on his credenza. The whiskey burned, but not as much as the knowledge that someone had outmaneuvered him so completely. Harrison Tech's security protocols had been designed by former NSA analysts and tested by ethical hackers who charged 7 figures for their services. The building itself was supposed to be impenetrable, yet somehow, someone had walked in, taken what they wanted, and left behind a taunting message that his army of experts couldn't decode. The audacity of it was almost impressive. Almost. The intercom buzzed, interrupting his brooding. "Mr. Harrison," came the voice of his executive assistant, Patricia Wells. "The board members are beginning to arrive. Dr. Martinez is here with the final analysis, and Mr. Wright has the technical briefing ready." "Send them in," David replied, straightening his tie and assuming the confident posture that had served him well through countless high-stakes negotiations. Whatever happened in the next few hours would determine whether Harrison Tech emerged stronger from this crisis or began a slow spiral toward irrelevance. The door opened and his crisis team filed in. Dr. Martinez carried a tablet loaded with diagnostic reports and security footage. Wright held a leather portfolio containing technical specifications and cryptographic analyses. Behind them came the other key players, the head of human resources, the director of facilities management, and the vice president of government relations. They took their positions around the conference table like generals preparing for battle. The holographic projector activated, displaying the mysterious German message in 3-dimensional text that seemed to float in the air above the table. Each character was highlighted in blue light, and connecting lines showed the mathematical relationships the cryptographers had identified. "Give me everything," David said, settling into his chair. "And don't sugarcoat it. I need to know exactly how bad this is." Dr. Martinez activated her tablet, and the holographic display shifted to show a timeline of the security breach. "The intruder entered the building at 11:47 p.m. on Tuesday night," she began. "They used what appears to be a legitimate access card, which means either they cloned an existing card or they had inside help." The display showed a figure in dark clothing moving through the building's corridors with obvious familiarity. Their face was obscured by shadows and strategic camera positioning, but their movements suggested someone who knew the layout intimately. "They disabled 14 security cameras along their route," Dr. Martinez continued, "but they did it selectively, leaving others operational to avoid triggering a full system alert. This level of technical knowledge suggests professional training." Wright leaned forward, his expression grim. "The encoding on this message is unlike anything we've encountered. It's not a simple substitution cipher or even a modern encryption algorithm. The mathematical structure suggests a custom methodology, possibly based on German cryptographic techniques from the World War II era, but modified with contemporary complexity theory." David studied the floating text, searching for patterns his experts had missed. The message seemed to taunt him with its incomprehensibility, each line a reminder of his company's vulnerability. "What about the content?" he asked. "Any theories about what it might say?" "Based on the character frequency and structural analysis, we believe it contains specific information about Project Siegfried. The length and complexity suggest detailed technical specifications rather than a simple threat or ransom demand." The implications hung heavy in the air. If the message contained stolen technical data, it meant the intruder had not only accessed their most secure systems, but also understood the significance of what they had found. This wasn't a random attack or opportunistic theft. It was targeted, sophisticated, and deeply personal. David stood and walked to the windows, gazing out at the city that had watched his rise to power. Somewhere out there, someone was holding the keys to his empire's future, and they had chosen to communicate through a puzzle he couldn't solve.
The irony wasn't lost on him. Harrison Tech had built its reputation on solving the unsolvable, on creating unbreakable codes and impenetrable security systems. Now, when it mattered most, they were completely outmatched by someone who remained invisible and anonymous. In 2 hours, the board meeting would begin, and David would have to admit that despite all their resources, all their expertise, and all their technological advantages, they had been defeated by 47 lines of encoded German text. Little did he know that the solution to his impossible puzzle was already in the building, wearing a uniform he barely noticed, carrying secrets that would change everything he thought he knew about the people around him. The Harrison Tech boardroom on the 43rd floor had been designed to intimidate. 24 leather chairs surrounded a table carved from a single piece of Brazilian rosewood, each position equipped with its own holographic interface and secure communication terminal. The walls displayed real-time feeds of global stock markets, and a massive screen at the far end could project anything from quarterly reports to satellite imagery. By 4:30 in the afternoon, 23 of the most powerful people in the technology industry had assembled around that table. These weren't just investors, they were titans who had shaped the digital landscape for the past 30 decades. Margaret Steinberg, the legendary venture capitalist who had funded 6 unicorn companies before her 40th birthday. Robert Chan, whose semiconductor empire supplied processors to half the world's smartphones. Victoria Nash, the former CIA director who now sat on the boards of 8 major defense contractors. David Harrison stood at the head of the table, his navy suit impeccable despite the stress of the past 72 hours. Behind him, the wall screen displayed the Harrison Tech logo, a stylized eagle with wings made of circuit patterns. But everyone in the room knew this wasn't going to be a routine quarterly review. "Ladies and gentlemen," David began, his voice carrying the confidence that had convinced these same people to invest billions in his vision. "I want to thank you for adjusting your schedules on short notice. What I'm about to share with you is classified at the highest levels, and I need your commitment that nothing discussed here leaves this room." Margaret Steinberg leaned forward, her silver hair catching the light from the overhead displays. "David, your message mentioned a critical security issue. Are we talking about a data breach that could affect our government contracts?" "We're talking about something far more serious," David replied, activating the wall screen. The mysterious German message appeared in stark black text against a white background, its 47 lines of encoded characters filling the entire display. "3 nights ago, someone infiltrated our most secure facility and accessed Project Siegfried."
The reaction was immediate. Robert Chen's face went pale, understanding the implications better than most. Victoria Nash pulled out a secure tablet and began typing rapidly, probably alerting her contacts in the intelligence community. Several board members began speaking at once, their voices overlapping in a cacophony of concern and disbelief. "How is that possible?" demanded Dr. Frank Mueller, the former MIT professor who had helped design Harrison Tech's security protocols. "The Siegfried lab requires biometric authentication, encrypted keycards, and neural pattern recognition. It would take a team of specialists months to even plan such an infiltration." "And yet," David said, his voice cutting through the noise, "someone did it in under 30 minutes. They knew exactly where to go, which systems to disable, and what to take. This wasn't random, it was surgical." He activated the holographic projector, and a 3-dimensional model of the Harrison Tech building appeared above the table. Red lines traced the intruder's path through the facility, showing how they had avoided the most heavily monitored areas while still reaching their target. "Our head of security has reviewed every second of footage," David continued. "The intruder moved like someone with intimate knowledge of our layout and protocols. They disabled cameras selectively, avoided motion sensors that weren't publicly documented, and knew the exact timing of our security rotations." Victoria Nash looked up from her tablet, her expression grim. Inside job? That's what we thought initially, David admitted. We've conducted polygraph tests on every employee with Siegfried clearance. We've analyzed financial records, communication logs, and travel patterns for the past 6 months. Every single person came back clean. The holographic building model zoomed in on the secure lab, showing the exact location where the message had been left. The German text appeared to float in space, its encoded characters casting shadows on the faces of the board members. "Which brings us to this," David said, gesturing to the floating message. "Left deliberately on my personal workstation. Not hidden, not encrypted in our systems. Placed where I would find it immediately." Dr. Mueller stood and walked closer to the projection, studying the text with the intensity that had made him one of the world's leading cryptographers before he transitioned to corporate governance. The structure is fascinating. It's clearly encoded, but the methodology isn't in any database I know of. We've consulted with the NSA, the FBI's cybercrime division, and 3 private firms that specialize in historical cryptography. Combined, they've spent over 200 hours attempting to decode this message. The result is 0 progress. Margaret Steinberg's voice was sharp with concern. "What's the worst-case scenario here, David? What if this message contains complete technical specifications for Siegfried?" David had been dreading this question, but he knew it had to be addressed. If someone has successfully reverse-engineered our quantum encryption protocols, they could potentially compromise any system that relies on current cybersecurity standards. That includes military communications, financial networks, and critical infrastructure. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Project Siegfried wasn't just another corporate research initiative. It was the foundation of national digital security for the next generation. In the wrong hands, the technology could be weaponized to devastating effect. Robert Chen activated his own tablet and began pulling up market data. Our stock price has already dropped 12% since rumors started circulating. If this becomes public knowledge before we resolve it, we're looking at a catastrophic loss of investor confidence. The Department of Defense is asking pointed questions. I've been fielding calls from Pentagon officials who want to know if their investment is secure. If we can't guarantee the integrity of Siegfried, they might pull funding and award the contract to one of our competitors. David nodded, having anticipated this pressure. The government contracts weren't just lucrative, they were validation that Harrison Tech remained at the cutting edge of cybersecurity innovation. Losing them would signal to the entire industry that the company was vulnerable and unreliable. "There's something else," David said, activating another display that showed global intelligence reports. "Our contacts in various agencies have detected unusual activity in several foreign markets. Someone has been making discreet inquiries about quantum encryption technologies, specifically asking about theoretical vulnerabilities in next-generation protocols." Dr. Mueller turned away from the floating message, his expression troubled. "You're suggesting this might be state-sponsored industry espionage?" "I'm suggesting we can't rule it out," David replied. "The sophistication of the infiltration, the precision of the data extraction, and now this encoded message that none of our experts can crack, it all points to resources and capabilities beyond what typical corporate competitors possess." The board members exchanged glances, each calculating the potential ramifications for their own business interests. Harrison Tech's technology formed the backbone of security systems across multiple industries. If the company's reputation for impregnability was shattered, the ripple effects would be felt throughout the global economy. "What's our timeline?" asked Thomas Bradbury, the former Treasury Secretary who now oversaw Harrison Tech's government relations. "How long before this becomes a public relations nightmare?" David checked his watch, a custom piece that displayed multiple time zones and encrypted communications from his security team. "We have maybe 48 hours before the media starts asking questions we can't answer. Our competitors are already positioning themselves to capture our market share if we appear vulnerable." "And the government contracts?" The Pentagon has given us 1 week to provide a comprehensive security assessment and demonstrate that Siegfried's integrity is intact. If we can't do that, they'll suspend all funding pending a full investigation. Margaret Steinberg stood and began pacing behind her chair, a habit that had become legendary during high-stakes negotiations. So we have an unknown intruder with possible government backing, a message our best experts can't decode, and a week to save contracts worth $750 million. That's an accurate summary, David confirmed.
What about hiring external help? Suggested Dr. Mueller. There are private cryptographers who specialize in historical encoding methods. Maybe someone with experience in German wartime communications could provide insights our people are missing. Victoria Nash shook her head. The security clearance requirements alone would take months. We need solutions now, not next quarter. David activated the building's secure communication system, ensuring their conversation couldn't be monitored or recorded by outside parties. I've authorized unlimited overtime for our entire cryptography department. They're working in 12-hour shifts with fresh eyes on the problem every half day. What about offering a reward? Asked Robert Chen. Sometimes crowdsourcing can solve problems that stump experts. If we offered significant compensation for decoding the message, we might attract talent from unexpected sources. Too risky, Victoria replied immediately. We'd be advertising our vulnerability to every hostile intelligence service in the world. The message itself would become public knowledge, and we'd lose any advantage we might have. The holographic display flickered as David received an incoming priority message on his secure terminal. He glanced at it briefly, then looked up at the assembled board members with an expression of grim determination. Dr. Martinez just confirmed that the intruder used a cloned security badge to enter the building, he announced. The original belongs to someone with routine access to all floors, including the executive levels. An employee? Asked Margaret. Or someone with intimate knowledge of our personnel, David replied. We're expanding the investigation to include all service contractors, maintenance staff, and security personnel who work in this building. The implications were troubling. If the breach had been facilitated by someone with legitimate access, it meant the intruder had been planning this operation for months, possibly years. It also meant that Harrison Tech's enemy was patient, methodical, and dangerously well-informed. As the board meeting continued into the evening, none of the 24 people in that room suspected that the solution to their impossible puzzle was 13 floors below them, making his routine security rounds in a uniform they barely noticed. 6 months after that night in David Harrison's office, the Harrison Tech Tower stood transformed in ways both visible and invisible. The building's security protocols had been completely redesigned, but more importantly, the culture within its walls had undergone a fundamental shift that surprised even the most seasoned employees. Marcus Thompson's corner office on the 39th floor featured floor-to-ceiling windows with a commanding view of Puget Sound. The mahogany desk that had once belonged to a vice president now held dual monitors displaying encrypted communications from intelligence agencies across 3 continents. On the wall behind his chair hung his newly framed doctorate in Germanic Studies and Cryptanalysis from Georgetown University, alongside commendations from the FBI, NSA, and Department of Defense. But it was the object on his bookshelf that drew the most attention from visitors, a simple security guard's radio permanently set to the building's emergency frequency. Marcus had kept it as a reminder of the night that changed everything, when a billionaire CEO learned to see beyond uniforms and a former intelligence officer reclaimed his true identity. The story of their first encounter had become legendary throughout the technology industry, though the classified details remained known only to a select few. What the public knew was that Harrison Tech not only survived its greatest crisis, but had emerged stronger, more innovative, and more secure than ever before. What they didn't know was how close the company had come to complete destruction,
and how an unlikely partnership had saved not just corporate secrets, but potentially national security itself. Marcus had never intended to remain anonymous forever. His plan had always been to complete his doctorate, then quietly transition back into the intelligence community where his skills would be properly utilized. The security guard position had been nothing more than a way to pay rent while finishing his research on Nazi encryption methods, research that had inadvertently made him one of the world's leading experts on the exact type of code that had nearly destroyed Harrison Tech. The irony wasn't lost on him. For 18 months, he had walked the halls of a cybersecurity company, invisible to the executives whose conversations he overheard, whose classified documents he glimpsed during his rounds. He had watched them struggle with problems he could have solved, seen them make strategic mistakes he could have prevented, all while wearing a uniform that rendered him intellectually invisible. When David had made that desperate offer in front of the entire board, he recognized it as more than just a challenge. It was an opportunity to bridge two worlds that rarely intersected, the ivory tower of academic research and the practical demands of corporate security. More than that, it was a chance to prove that expertise could emerge from the most unexpected places. The decoding process had taken Marcus less than 4 hours once he was given proper access to the complete message. The German text had been encoded using a modified version of the Enigma protocol, but updated with modern complexity theory that made it nearly impossible to crack without understanding both the historical foundation and contemporary cryptographic principles. It was exactly the kind of hybrid challenge his doctorate research had prepared him to handle. But the message itself had been more shocking than anyone anticipated. Rather than containing stolen technical specifications, it had been a warning. The intruder, revealed through Marcus's analysis to be Dr. Klaus Weber, a former Stasi operative turned corporate spy, had discovered a fundamental vulnerability in Project Siegfried that Harrison Tech's own engineers had missed. The quantum encryption protocol that was supposed to be unbreakable actually contained a mathematical flaw that could be exploited by anyone with sufficient computational resources. The revelation had led to a complete redesign of Siegfried's core algorithms, ultimately making it stronger and more secure than originally envisioned. The Department of Defense had not only maintained their funding, but had increased it by 40%. Recognizing that Harrison Tech's willingness to acknowledge and fix fundamental flaws demonstrated unprecedented integrity in the defense contracting world. Marcus's transition from security guard to chief of cryptographic security had been seamless in some ways, revolutionary in others. His technical expertise was unquestioned. His doctoral work had involved collaborations with intelligence agencies that few academics could claim. But his perspective, shaped by months of observing corporate culture from the bottom up, brought insights that traditional executives had never considered. He had instituted a program called Invisible Intelligence, where employees from all levels of the organization were encouraged to contribute ideas and observations regardless of their official job descriptions. The cleaning staff, who moved through secure areas after hours, became an informal intelligence network that reported unusual activities. Maintenance workers, who understood the building's infrastructure better than anyone, identified potential security vulnerabilities that had been overlooked by expensive consultants. The program had already prevented 2 attempted breaches and identified a corporate espionage operation being conducted by a competitor. More importantly, it had fundamentally changed how Harrison Tech's leadership viewed the people who kept their company functioning. David Harrison had been the most transformed of all. The man who had once conducted sensitive phone calls in front of janitors now made a point of learning the names and backgrounds of every employee, regardless of their position. He had discovered that the night shift supervisor held an MBA in international business, that one of the cafeteria workers was a former software engineer who had lost his job during the dot-com crash, and that the building's head of maintenance had served as a combat engineer in Afghanistan. "You know what I learned that night?" David said during a company-wide meeting 6 months later, standing before an audience of 5,000 employees gathered in the building's main auditorium. I learned that we had been sitting on a gold mine of talent and experience, and we were too blind to see it because we were focused on job titles instead of actual capabilities. The audience, a mix of executives, engineers, administrative staff, and service workers, listened with rapt attention as their CEO continued. Marcus Thompson taught me that genius doesn't always wear a suit and tie. Sometimes it carries a flashlight and walks the halls at midnight. Sometimes it speaks with an accent we don't recognize or comes from a background we don't understand. Our job as leaders isn't to make assumptions about people's potential. It's to create environments where that potential can be recognized and developed. In the months that followed, Harrison Tech became known not just for its technological innovations, but for its revolutionary approach to human resources. The company began recruiting from unconventional sources: refugee communities with language skills and international experience, military veterans with specialized technical training, and graduate students who needed flexible work arrangements while completing their education. The results spoke for themselves. Harrison Tech's patent applications increased by 60%, their employee retention rate became the highest in the industry, and their government contracts expanded to include projects that required cultural and linguistic expertise that their competitors couldn't match. Marcus had kept in touch with Dr. Klaus Weber, who had been quietly extracted from the country by German intelligence before the FBI could arrest him. Through encrypted communications, Weber had revealed that his warning about Siegfried's vulnerabilities had been motivated not by loyalty to any government, but a genuine concern that flawed encryption technology could destabilize global communication security. In my experience, Weber had written in his final message to Marcus, the greatest threats to security come not from external enemies, but from internal blind spots. Your company was so focused on building walls that you forgot to examine your foundation. The observation had become something of a guiding principle for Marcus as he developed Harrison Tech's new security protocols. True security, he had learned, required not just technological sophistication, but organizational humility, the recognition that threats could emerge from anywhere and solutions could come from anyone. As Marcus sat in his corner office, reviewing intelligence reports from agencies around the world, he often thought about the security guard radio on his bookshelf. It reminded him that titles and positions were temporary, but the ability to see clearly, think critically, and act decisively was permanent. The building's evening shift was beginning, and he could see the new security guards making their rounds on the floors below. Each of them had been hired not just for their vigilance, but for their backgrounds and expertise. Former teachers, retired military officers, graduate students in various fields, all of them bringing unique perspectives to the seemingly simple task of keeping the building secure. David Harrison stopped by Marcus's office as he prepared to leave for the day, a routine that had developed over the past few months. The two men had formed an unlikely friendship built on mutual respect and shared understanding of how quickly assumptions could be shattered. "Any interesting developments today?" David asked, settling into the chair across from Marcus's desk. "3 patent applications from our night shift team, including one for a quantum processor design that could revolutionize how we approach encryption at the hardware level." David smiled as he reviewed the documents. 6 months ago, I would have been shocked by this. Now I'm just impressed by the consistency of innovation we're seeing from unexpected sources." "The talent was always there," Marcus observed. "We just had to learn how to recognize it." As David left for the evening, Marcus turned back to his computer and began composing his weekly report to the intelligence community. Harrison Tech had become more than just a technology company. It had become a model for how organizations could harness the full spectrum of human potential by looking beyond surface appearances and conventional expectations. The security guard radio crackled softly on his bookshelf.
A reminder that sometimes the most important voices are the ones we're not trained to hear. And sometimes the people we overlook every day are exactly the ones who hold the keys to our success. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.